Long before sugar filled bowls and shops, it lived as a grass in Asia. People in India and Southeast Asia cultivated sugarcane because it held a sweet juice no other plant matched. At first, sweetness stayed local. Cane was heavy, it spoiled, and the juice turned sour quickly. So early sugar was chewed, boiled into syrup, or used fresh. It was pleasure, but it was not yet a product. Then refiners changed the rules. In parts of India, skilled makers heated cane juice, clarified it, and drove off water until it thickened and set. With careful work, the sticky syrup became a solid that could be broken, stored, and carried. It was a technical leap, not just a culinary one. A sweet that survived travel became something else entirely. It became a commodity, and it gained a new name in many languages: sugar. Once sweetness hardened into crystals, it began to move. Small, durable pieces meant merchants could weigh it, tax it, and trade it like other valuables. Its rarity made it expensive, so it travelled with other high-status goods, not with everyday food. Sugar became a luxury that signalled power, wealth, and access to distant skills. This shift mattered. A crop rooted in one region had turned into a coveted crystal that invited long-distance exchange. In the medieval Mediterranean, sugar stopped being an Eastern curiosity and became a moving technology. Islamic expansion carried cane farming and refining westward into lands with warm coasts and reliable irrigation. Growers planted cane in places like Syria and Egypt, then across North Africa and into Sicily and Al-Andalus. Knowledge travelled with administrators, merchants, and enslaved workers. What mattered was control of water, land, and labour. Sugar production became organised, repeatable, and exportable. Refining techniques improved as the crop moved. Crushing mills extracted more juice. Boiling houses concentrated it into syrup, then crystals. These were not casual kitchen tasks. They required fuel, skilled oversight, and steady supplies. Ports linked these sugar zones to wider trade routes, and sugar began to circulate with other prized goods. It travelled as cones, loaves, and powders that lasted longer than fresh cane. Each step made sugar easier to ship, easier to tax, and easier to profit from. European contacts brought the next shift. Sugar entered European markets as a high-status medicine spice. Buyers treated it like a drug, a tonic, even a luxury seasoning used in tiny amounts and sold at high prices. Apothecaries stocked it alongside pepper and cloves. Wealthy households used it to signal status, not to fill stomachs. Demand rose, but supply stayed limited and expensive. Sugar's value now came from distance and scarcity. That combination set the rules for everything that followed. In the 1400s, European powers looked past the Mediterranean and out into the Atlantic. Islands like Madeira and the Canaries offered something mainland Europe could not: space to control land, water, and labour all in one place. Sugarcane arrived as an experiment, but it quickly demanded commitment. It needed heavy clearing, constant irrigation, and expensive mills. Small farms could not carry that burden. Bigger estates started to take over. Once the cane grew, the real pressure began. Sugar had to be cut fast, crushed fast, and boiled fast before it spoiled. That clock forced a new kind of organisation. Landowners concentrated fields near mills, pushed workers into long, timed shifts, and treated labour as another input to be managed. Coerced labour expanded because free workers rarely accepted the pace or the punishment. The islands became testing grounds for an emerging plantation system. Then the model spread further south to São Tomé, where conditions suited cane and profits tempted investors. Estates enlarged, and the work became more locked in and more violent, built around control rather than choice. Sugar left these islands in increasing volume, and Europeans learned a hard lesson. The crop paid best when production looked like a machine. These Atlantic experiments did not stay local. They became a blueprint for what came next. In the 1500s, European colonization in the Caribbean and along Brazil's coast sped up. Sugar stopped being an experiment and became a plan. Colonists wanted land that produced one thing in huge volume for export. Cane fit that demand. It grew fast in the tropics, and it sold well across the ocean, so the frontier did not spread evenly. It locked onto the sugar zone. To make that zone, forests and mixed fields gave way to a single crop. Trees fell, wetlands shifted, and animals and plants that fed local communities disappeared. Cane demanded steady water, fuel for boiling, and roads to move heavy loads to ports. The plantation did not just occupy land, it reorganized it. Each new harvest tied more territory to mills, shipping, and distant markets. Indigenous societies faced the shock first. Colonists seized fields, hunting grounds, and river access, then pushed surviving communities into smaller, less fertile spaces, or into forced work. Old networks of trade and farming broke under new rules of ownership and punishment. Some resisted and fled. Others were absorbed into the plantation world. The result stayed clear. Sugar reshaped people as much as soil. By the 1600s, European demand no longer meant small shipments for elites. Sugar became the fuel of whole economies. Caribbean islands and Brazil turned into export machines, and the math was simple. More land planted in cane meant more labor needed, fast. Plantation owners looked across the Atlantic to West and Central Africa. Ships began leaving in steady waves, built for human cargo. A trade that already existed expanded into a system. The transatlantic slave trade linked 3 routes into one engine. European goods helped buy captives from African traders and wars. Captives were forced across the ocean in lethal crossings, and sugar and other crops returned to Europe as profit. This scale changed everything on the plantations. Enslaved Africans no longer served as one labor source among others. They became the workforce that made mass production possible, and plantation life was organized around extracting maximum output. Sugar empires grew because the system rewarded expansion. When prices held, planters cleared more land, bought more people, and pushed production harder. Insurance, credit, and shipping firms treated human beings as assets and losses on paper. European governments protected the trade with laws and navies because tax revenue depended on it. The result was a brutal stability, an industry designed to keep cane moving, kettles boiling, and lives spent to keep sugar cheap enough to sell. At the height of the plantation era, sugar stopped being a crop and became a machine. Cane had to be cut fast, crushed fast, and boiled fast before it spoiled. Mills turned day and night, pulling in stalks and pushing out juice. In the boiling houses, heat drove the work to a frantic pace as liquid thickened into crystal. Everything depended on timing. Every delay cost money. That rhythm landed on human bodies. Enslaved workers had been driven through cutting, feeding the rollers, hauling fuel, and tending dangerous vats. Injuries had been common and often permanent. Exhaustion had been built into the schedule, especially during harvest when sleep shrank to scraps. Disease spread in crowded quarters and punishment enforced speed. Mortality rose, and plantations treated replacement as a business expense. The numbers rewarded the cruelty. Sugar shipped out in bulk, insurance and credit smoothed the risks, and owners measured success in tons and profit. In Europe, the price fell low enough to reach ordinary kitchens, not just elites. Sugar-sweetened tea, porridge and cheap baked goods, adding quick calories to working diets. A new bond formed. Everyday comfort depended on distant, coerced labor. By the late 1700s, the sugar system faced a threat it had rarely faced before: open resistance that spread faster than the planters' control. On plantations across the Caribbean and the Americas, enslaved people ran away, slowed work, sabotaged equipment, and rose up. These were not isolated outbursts. They formed a pattern that exposed a hard truth. An economy built on captivity also depended on constant violence to keep running. Then came the shockwave. In the French colony of Saint-Domingue, where sugar and coffee profits had been enormous, a massive uprising began in 1791. Out of years of war and shifting alliances, Haiti emerged as an independent state, and slavery ended there, in fact, not theory. It terrified slave-holding societies. It also proved something radical. The plantation order could be broken, and a sugar colony could exist without legal bondage. At the same time, abolition movements grew louder in European capitals, and arguments once treated as dangerous entered mainstream politics. Activists organized petitions and boycotts, former enslaved people testified, and lawmakers debated whether slavery could be justified at all. Step by step, empires began to change the law, first attacking the slave trade, then slavery itself. It moved unevenly and violently, but legitimacy cracked and legal dismantling followed. In the 19th century, sugar stopped depending on hot colonies alone. European states had watched cane supplies swing with war, revolt, and blockade, and they wanted control. Then a new source proved it could work in cold soil: the sugar beet. Farmers planted it close to cities and rail lines. Refineries rose beside fields, not oceans. For the first time, sugar could be made inland, at home. Beet sugar changed the math of power. A country that grew beets no longer waited for ships from distant plantations. It could stockpile, plan prices, and feed factories that used sugar as an input, not a treat. Governments pushed the shift with tariffs, bounties, and research, treating sweetness like national infrastructure. Industrial refining tightened everything into a system. Standardized crystals, predictable output, and fewer surprises. Cane sugar did not disappear, but it faced a rival that could expand fast. Global supply diversified, and that cut into the old plantation monopoly. Sugar now moved through policies as much as through trade winds. It became a strategic commodity, tied to budgets and diplomacy, not just merchants. The result looked like progress: more sugar, more stability, but it also meant something colder. Modern states learned to engineer abundance. In the 20th century, sugar stopped looking like a special purchase and started acting like infrastructure. Big factories turned out packaged foods at a speed small bakers and kitchens could not match. To keep prices low and supply steady, governments supported farmers and refiners with tariffs, quotas, and direct payments. The result felt simple to shoppers. Sweetness stayed cheap year after year. That stability changed everything. Food companies then learned that sugar did more than sweeten. It softened textures, extended shelf life, and made mass-produced products taste reliable, even after weeks of shipping. Advertising did the rest, linking sugary cereals, sodas, and snacks to modern life, convenience, and family routines. Brand by brand, sugar moved from the table into the recipe itself. It hid in sauces, breads, and canned goods. It became normal without being noticed. Global trade locked this new diet into place. Sugar flowed across borders as ingredients and finished goods, shaped by deals between states and by the reach of multinational corporations. When one supply tightened, another source filled the gap, and processed foods kept expanding. People did not need to seek sugar out anymore. It arrived pre-mixed, pre-sold, and pre-approved. By the century's end, sweetness became a default setting of industrial eating. By the early 21st century, sugar no longer sat behind glass as a precious crystal. It flowed everywhere, cheap, plentiful, and hard to avoid. It slipped into bread, sauces, yogurt, and drinks, not as a treat, but as a routine part of daily eating. The payoff for industry stayed simple. Sugar boosted taste, extended shelf life, and encouraged repeat buying. For consumers, the cost stayed hidden until the consequences became impossible to ignore. Health systems then faced those consequences at scale. Rates of obesity and type 2 diabetes rose across many countries, and tooth decay remained one of the world's most common diseases. Researchers argued over exactly how sugar interacted with metabolism, hunger, and long-term risk, but the direction of concern stayed clear. Public agencies pushed guidelines to cut added sugars, while lobbyists fought back, challenging labels, limits, and taxes. The battle shifted from plantations to policy. At the same time, the old arguments about labor and land never fully disappeared. Keynes still demanded hard work, and reports continued to link parts of the supply chain to low wages, unsafe conditions, and exploitation. Expanding fields pressured water supplies, damaged habitats, and encouraged burning and chemical runoff in some regions. Against that backdrop, a new backlash took shape. Warning labels, soda taxes, reformulation, and consumers reading ingredients. Sugar ended where it began, defined by power. Only now the fight happened at the checkout and in the clinic.